throughout adulthood, then you want to hold on to that bone as much as you can because, you're going to hit menopause and the loss is going to begin. So if you think about it like banking, you don't want to be broke at the end of your life, but your earning capacity goes down. You want to get as much money in that bank as possible so that as your earning capacity goes down, you don't go down below the poverty line. That's essentially what's happening. And if you are perimenopausal, you know that you are right in that zone where loss is going to be rapid. So yes, you definitely want to be doing bone-friendly activities.
All right. Well, it's a real pleasure and an honor to have Dr. Belinda Beck on the show today. Welcome.
Oh, pleasure to be here.
I'm super excited for this conversation. There's such an interest in bone health in our community, and you are an authority in this space. And I'd love for you to share a little bit more about how drew you into the space. But just to give you a little bit of background, I found you because it was some of my followers, or I don't like followers, my Instagram family, they were sending me messages saying, hey, you got to go look at Dr. Belinda Beck and her work. And I was like, how did I not know you before? And I just dove right in. And I'm so happy I found you. And I heard you on my buddy Dr. Doug Lucas's episode as well and caught up with that. And he talks a lot about this study that you're quite famous for, the Lift More study. And a lot of people quote this study. And it's just a pleasure to have you. And I want to learn a little bit more about that study. But maybe let's first start with what drew you into studying bones and exercise in the first place.
Well, exercise, because it's always been part of my life, who I am, and what I believe is a healthy way to live. I do think it's a panacea therapy for everything, not just bone. But bone in particular, it was partly because I had bone stress injuries as a runner, and it was something that nobody was able to help me with. And so I started, my master's work was related to that. But the minute you delve into bone physiology and you start to learn about this tissue, I challenge anyone to not be hooked. It's just a fascinating, amazing, fabulous tissue.
Yes, I heard your story and how you had these injuries. And of course, that's an interesting way to get into this work. And also, I remember when I first learned about bone being a living, growing tissue that breaks down and builds up. And we tend to think of bone as being static, like you build it when you're a kid and then it's done. And it's not like that.
No, well, most of us, we either see pictures of it, or the only time we ever really come across it is a chicken bone in our food. And there it just looks like an inert lump of hard stuff. But yeah, we know that it is full of bone cells. It's full of holes. It's full of blood. It's got nerves in it. It's highly responsive. It's got blood cells in there. It's very important for that. It communicates with all the other tissues in the body. So not only does it support us, but it protects organs. It is a massive calcium bank storage facility. Yes, it's an extremely important and multifunctional tissue.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I feel like there's a whole other episode we should do on joints, because today we're going to focus on the bone part, but the joints is also a major part of the bone. But it's another deep dive, maybe for another episode. But it is such an important, this is the part that we may feel when we have issues. And I've had someone who had osteoarthritis of the hips for years. And believe it or not, I have 2 total hip replacements and I'm only 55. So I understand the importance of bone more than many people, because you have this lived experiences. But focusing on the bone itself, I'd love for you to explain what happens to our bones as we're going through this menopause transition, because a lot of this stuff happens, a lot of the breakdown actually happens quite quickly during this period. And this is where we start to become more aware. I never thought about my bones before menopause. So what's going on?
To a bit of background, we have different kinds of bone cells. These 2 main cells work together to help resorb packets of bone and then also rebuild. So osteoclasts are the bone resorbing cells. I'm doing this with my hands because I always think of like the Pac-Man in that very old video game. That's how they operate. They resorb bone. They release calcium into the bloodstream so that we can use it everywhere else. When they're resorbing bone, they're quite often resorbing damage. And then along comes osteoblasts, which replace that bone with nice new bone. Now, that happens constantly. We remodel. That process is called remodeling. We remodel 5% of our skeleton every year. It's happening constantly. It's happening while we're sitting here. It is controlled by a lot of things, many things. But for women, one of the most important things, probably the most important hormone, is estrogen, because what estrogen does is it controls the osteoclasts, the Pac-Men, and it sort of clamps them a certain amount and stops them resorbing too much. When you go through menopause and estrogen, circulating estrogen, essentially bottoms out in our systems, it vanishes. Suddenly that clamp is removed from the osteoclast, or the little Pac-Man. So they get to just have a free-for-all on the skeleton for about 5 to 8 years, where they're just resorbing more than the osteoblasts rebuild. So unless you do certain things. So that's the main reason why we lose bone rapidly. That effect happens because of the withdrawal of estrogen. And you get this rapid loss for a period of years, and then it sort of levels out again, and we then begin to just lose bone at the same rate as men.
So it's interesting why so estrogen sounds like it's putting the brakes on the osteoclasts, like it's from the eating up the bone, let's say. But does it not have a role in actually building it up too with the osteoblasts, or is it just putting the brakes on?
I'm not a molecular biologist, so I probably should stay in my lane in case. It always annoys me when people talk about stuff that they're not absolute experts on, especially when they get it wrong. It is a complex function, and the relationship between the osteoclast and osteoblast is connected. So even if it's not a direct effect, there is an indirect effect there. And there are all sorts of things that affect your hormones in your blood, so that it is always fluctuating, and there are other things that we can do and take that withdraw it as well. Things like some of the hormone suppressing drugs for cancer therapies and that sort of thing. That's why they're so bad for bone.
There's a lot of things actually that go down a whole list of things that are good for bone, bad for bone. But let's focus a little bit about why do we need to pay attention to our bones in midlife? Because I've heard women saying, well, I don't know, I don't feel anything. My bones are fine. I interview women all around the world. I literally stop them on the street and I ask them 5 questions about menopause. And one of them is, have you had your bones checked? And I often get, well, no, I don't. My bones, I feel fine. and we don't feel this. So a lot of us are not paying attention until we have a problem. So why is it important now in our 40s, 50s to look at our bone health?
As with anything, prevention is definitely better than cure for anything. And it's not actually just in your 40s, it's all of your life. And in fact, to just scoot backwards to our childhood, if we could, and many people, of course, can influence the childhood of children and grandchildren who may be listening. That is the time where you really have to take care of your bones, because you want to get as much bone as you possibly can before the age of 20, when you reach roughly your peak bone mass. So it's absolutely imperative that you eat right and you do a lot of exercise when you're young. Throughout adulthood, then, you want to hold on to that bone as much as you can, because you're going to hit menopause and the loss is going to begin. So if you think about it like banking, you don't want to be broke at the end of your life, but your earning capacity goes down. You want to get as much money in that bank as possible, so that as your earning capacity goes down, you don't go down below the poverty line. That's essentially what's happening. And if you are perimenopausal, you know that you are right in that zone where loss is going to be rapid. So yes, you definitely want to be doing bone-friendly activities.
Yeah, you need extra cash in the bank to, when the times are rough, you'll be okay. I love that analogy. You mentioned the peak bone mass in your 20s, and I've myself been quoted, because I've found some other research showing that it's in the 30s. So am I misquoting? Is there a difference between bone mass and bone density, and maybe clear some of that confusion?
Yeah. To be perfectly honest, the variation between people is so huge that when we use these numbers, it's a mean, like it's an average. And not only is it an average, it doesn't take account of the difference between men and women. So in fact, women probably stop growing on average around about age 18. And that means that their bone growth plates have fused and there's no longer any growth in length. You will still be able to consolidate bone mass a little bit, maybe get a little bit more bone density, but your growth in length is not going to continue. Men tend to grow for a little bit longer and maybe into their early 20s or mid 20s. So they're going to continue to grow bone in length and then consolidate a bit. But if you put men and women together, on average, it's about 20 where you have 99% of all the bone you're ever going to have. They will continue to creep up a little bit towards 30, and 30 might be the absolute peak. But really the most important thing to realize is the vast majority of what you're going to have ever is by 20.
Oh gosh. Okay. So I have been telling my kids in their 20s, they're in their 20s now. I just keep telling them, just build that bone, please build it, put it in the bank because you need it. But I was under the impression like, they still have some time, but actually time is running very quickly. So I think some of the advice that you have right now is if you've got kids in their teens or young children, get them to do the things that they need to do to build the bone mass, which I think we're gonna cover too as well. Now, one other thing that I've had my kids do, and I don't know if it's your opinion on this, is to get a bone scan. And I'd love to talk a little bit about the DEXA. This is what most of us are using to screen our bones. And we see a number, and so many women in my community don't like that number, and they're told they have osteopenia, which is a stage before osteoporosis, low bone density. So they panic. So I would love to know your thoughts on DEXA scans and maybe some of their limitations and how much we should rely on that one score.
Once upon a time, I probably would have been more disparaging about DEXA than I am now. But I have, just with the benefit of hindsight and of all the other options that I have looked at over the last couple of decades, I've come to realize that although it's not perfect by any means, it actually is still the best thing we have. It's low X-ray radiation. It is quick, easy, cheap. Doctors understand what it is, and the T-score is very well recognized and able to be used to determine whether someone has osteopenia or osteoporosis. So actually on a population scale, DEXA is actually still a really good, useful tool, and getting that number is a really good guide. But there are many things to consider. The first one is if you're going to use it as a tool to track your bones, you have to have all your scans on the same machine. So keep going to the same clinic because you can't compare your scores between machines, not just models of DEXA, the actual machine. Mm-hmm. As well as that, it's a two-dimensional sort of projected image because the X-ray source sits in the bottom of the machine. You lie down on the machine, it shines the X-ray through your body, and there's a detector above in an arm that goes along with the X-ray source. It only can really detect your bone mineral density in 2 dimensions. So, because it's just going through in one bin. That means that it's going to probably underestimate bone mass in small people and overestimate in big people. But it's not a huge amount. It still is going to give you a pretty good indication of what your BMD is. Possibly more problematic measurement errors, and that would be if somebody has a lot of arthritis in their spine. Now, arthritis, as you mentioned, that's a joint condition, and often what happens is the bone overgrows at the joint line, and if a piece of bone overgrows at a joint line between the vertebrae and then grows over the top of the body of the vertebrae, it will artificially inflate your BMD, and it might look like you've got more bone there than you really have because it's external to the bone. It's not adding anything to the strength of the bone. So that's why the WHO definition of osteoporosis was made based on the hip to take that problem out of the issue. Mm-hmm. The trouble is at the hip, if you don't have really good positioning, you can also get varied results. So I've just listed some of the bad things, some of the things the reasons that people are disparaging about DEXA, and they're real and they're true. But even with all things considered, it's still a pretty good guide.
Is it true? I've heard a statistic floating around that 70% of the people who have an osteoporotic fracture, they don't actually have osteoporosis shown on a DEXA. Is that true, or is that something that's...
It's true that the vast majority of fractures that occur, osteoporotic fractures that occur, minimal trauma fractures as we call them, happen in people with osteopenia. Now, that's not because you're more at risk if you have osteopenia. It's purely because there are more people with osteopenia. It's just a statistical phenomenon. If you think about the bell curve of bone mineral density of all the people, most people are clustered in the middle. Some have very low bone mass or osteopenia, osteoporosis at the end. but most of them have normal to osteopenic bone. And so that's where most of the fractures occur. And it's because other things apart from bone mineral density contribute to your risk of fracture, and falls is a very important one, particularly for hip fracture. But also the structure, the internal structure of bone is really important to its strength. For example, inside the vertebrae, it's made up of trabecular bone, which is like this hard, spongy bone tissue, where there are lots of struts and interconnecting beams with those struts. When you have some sort of stressor on the bone that makes the osteoclast resorb a lot, if an osteoclast actually perforates a whole beam between those struts and it goes away, there's nothing for an osteoblast to lay new bone or replacement bone on. So that's gone completely and it's not coming back. So you've not only got two struts that have also been thinned, but you've lost this extremely important strengthening beam that holds them together and makes each of them stronger. So it definitely is about structure as well as BMD.
So then that makes me more skeptical about the DEXA. We're already panicking if we're in osteopenia, but then even if you're not, you may go, well, how much can I trust this? And is there other numbers and other types of screening or markers that we need to look at?
Well, there are, but as I say, there is still not anything that I would trust more. There are some new things coming out. We can talk about those later. But remembering that if you do have a vertebrae and you've lost a lot of beams in there, the DEXA is going to pick that up. It will be lower BMD because they're not there. So it will still detect that the BMD is lower. It just won't be able to tell you whether that's because you've got a lot of interconnected struts that are still there but very thin, or whether they're not there anymore and these ones are just thicker. It won't tell you that. The only way to really know about that is to have a much higher radiation scan with something like a CT scan. There are some techniques with MRI as well, but CT is probably the one that is the most able to detect that. There are higher resolution PQCTs as well, but they can't scan at the spine, which is where we really want to scan. They can only scan distal parts of your forearm and leg.
So the DEXA scan looks at bone mineral density, how dense your bones are. And you mentioned about bone strength or bone quality. And I've heard of the REMS scan, REMS, and
Yes.
the difference that I understand is that it looks at bone mineral density, but it also looks at the strength or the quality of the bone, like you said, the structure, the architecture of the bone. And it's a new technology, so I'd love to know what your opinion is on that.
Highly controversial. You might be aware that just in the last couple of days, another paper has come out being quite critical of REMS because of the fact that the score itself is very influenced by age and weight. And some researchers in Australia actually have done a lot of measures of a group of people, and they have found that just looking at age and weight will predict this person's score just as well as the REMS score itself. So that's because the company that has created REMS has used age and weight in their algorithm, because it's not a direct measure. It's not an ultrasound, it's ultrasound technology, but it's not an ultrasound measure per se of the bone. It's actually an ultrasound technique that creates a value and compares that value to a group of other measures and set of DEXA measures actually, and says which one is it most like. So their argument is that they're able to look at bone and you can, the benefit is that the arthritis that I was talking about before isn't a problem because it's not a density measure, and that's a good thing. However, the way they calculate the score it seems like it's quite problematic, and I would say we're not there yet. I have one in my lab and I'm trying to do some research with it, and I very much hope that it works. But yeah, I'm still waiting to see how all the chips fall for REMS.
Oh, it'd be interesting to see what results you get, because you have a lab and you have them and you have these potential clients or people or patients who can go through it. And I guess time will tell in your experience with using DEXA and using REMS and then comparing the two. And I've done both myself. I heard about it. I thought, this is interesting. I've done the DEXA for the first time in my life. It was maybe 53 or so. I was told I had osteopenia. And I was like, that's very strange, but osteoarthritis. And I haven't been doing impact. I'm not allowed to do all this stuff. Going through menopause, it could be true. But it's a heavy weight. It's a fear. Like I was thinking, oh my gosh, if I have this now in my 50s, what am I going to do when I'm in my 70s? And I got to sort this out. So I got the replacements. I'm now going back. But I did also soon after the REMS scan, and it showed similar bone mineral density, but it said the quality and the strength were really good. So I felt like a weight lifted off of me, like, oh, I shouldn't stress as much as I was or obsessing about it as I was. Doesn't mean I don't do the impact and I do the food and I manage all of the things I need to do. But it did give me a sense of relief. Now, I don't know if that's a false sense of security or if it's actually true. And I don't even know how to assess that.
And I don't think anyone can give you an answer to that at the moment, not even the people who developed it. They would argue that they have given you a better indication of the quality of your bone, and perhaps they have, but we don't know. What if they have? I would say it is almost certainly a reflection of the fact that it's picking up this interconnectedness of the trabecular bone. And because for years we did ultrasound of the heel bone, and we looked at broadband ultrasound attenuation and speed of sound, and that was very much related to interconnectedness and thickness of the trabeculae and quality. So yes, there's every chance that if their measure is real, that would make sense. But again, the jury is still very much out. And of course, it's a new technology and they're trying to sell it. So of course they're going to be telling you it's better than DEXA. But remember, it is actually difficult for them to say it's better than DEXA when they are comparing their outcomes against DEXA. You can't kind of have your cake and eat it.
Yeah, we'll see. But in the meantime, we got to go still build bone. And I think, I'm not sure if, what we hear, another statistic we hear, one of the reasons we think, oh, we really got to pay attention to our bones is to keep our independence. I'm a gerontologist and I understand what happens when we fall and fracture. And the statistic that goes around, and it's another thing, fear-based statistic, is up to 30% of the people will die within a year who've had a hip fracture over the age of 65. And that's kind of scary. So I would love for you to explain that statistic and then maybe put things into perspective if we need to hear that.
Yes, it is actually a very complex statistical sort of or epidemiological fact that the minute you have a hip fracture at any age, that mortality rate goes up. It goes up even if you're 50, but not very much. But if you're 90, almost 100% of people who have a hip fracture age 90 are dead within 6 months. And that is almost certainly because they're old. There's all sorts of other things wrong with them. They've probably fallen because they're frail. And so they are bedridden for a considerable amount of time. They recover from a hip surgery poorly. You know what happens to the body when you're bedridden and you stop moving. So it's that kind of outcome. And I would say it's probably the same reason for the younger people, but the reason it doesn't affect younger people as much is because there are fewer of them who are already frail.
Yeah, I think the frailty piece is really important. And this is why we kind of beat the drum on building muscle and being strong, because 100%. If you do have that fall, you have a good muscle mass and you're quite strong and not frail, then that statistic doesn't seem to apply so much to you.
That's right. There's absolutely no reason why you should die of a hip fracture if you are a fit, strong, healthy person. Bone is beautifully able to heal itself. If you set a fracture, let the thing heal and just get your life back on track. That is what a healthy person should do and should expect to be able to do. The problem is when it makes you immobile, or because we know that if you have one minimal trauma fracture, your risk of having another is increased by 4. So it's this nasty sort of spiral downwards, because if you think about a person who has very low bone mass in the spine, they have a crush fracture, perhaps it's a wedge fracture, so the front part of their spine crushes, which makes them stooped over, and then possibly that position That stooped over position makes them start lifting things in that position, which makes it more likely that they're going to have another crush fracture of the bones beside them, which makes them more stooped over. That's putting their center of mass at least to the edge of, if not outside of their base of support, which instantly makes them more likely to fall, then this whole thing is spiraling because the vertebral fractures really change people's physique and balance and their function. And people who are very stooped, they can't keep their heads up, they can't put their arms above their head and reach things. They tend to use step stools to reach things because they've started to shrink. Step stool in the kitchen is a recipe for disaster. That's a trip hazard. So yeah, it's a spiraling thing. This is why I said right at the start, the answer is prevention.
Yeah, it's when I think about these, when you describe somebody hunched over and they're really less flexible, and you think of somebody in their 70s and 80s, how do they get there? And this is a gradual thing over the time. What is it that they haven't been doing? Or is this partly genetic? How does that progress? What happened?
Well, osteoporosis is definitely genetic, and we know it runs in families, but you can also tell by looking at somebody of a small, very non-muscular person is straight away going to be much more likely to have osteoporosis and sarcopenia, low muscle mass, which makes them more likely to fall over. So how do we get there? It's the same story as the majority, unfortunately, of people are not particularly active throughout their life, and they become less active throughout their life. And the less active you become, the less you can do. So that is totally a snowballing effect, so that at the end of your life, you become quite incapacitated. Now, add a layer over that of being a woman. And if you are perhaps married to a lovely gentleman who was brought up to look after and think that a woman needs help with heavy things, and because they're weak, a man doing all that heavy stuff is not doing a woman any favors. The woman needs to keep doing that heavy stuff, or they won't be able to. And we know that men tend to die before women. So think about two people 80 years old, the man dies, leaves an 80-year-old woman who has not lifted anything heavier than a teacup in the last 20 years. Wow. And then she's got to look after herself. So it is sedentarianism. That is what is causing this rash of falls and fractures. We have to keep active. Bone is a use it or lose it tissue.
So true. And another piece I think we're not aware of, and I only became aware of it when I had osteoarthritis, is pain, living with chronic pain and losing the range of motion. And so you put yourself in these positions to not find pain, and you just do less and less. Yeah. So the pain, just living with that, is a very stressful thing. And on top of that, you get a little depressed. You're not able to do things anymore, even if you want to. And that's another piece of the puzzle, I think, that gets people to where they're at. And I used to be a little cocky, like, you just move, and what's wrong with people? You got to exercise your whole life. And then I was living with chronic pain myself and getting worse and worse and worse. And I thought, oh my gosh, I am living like an 80-year-old who has chronic pain. And I can see now where this all goes. I've studied it, but I didn't understand it or assimilate it until I went through it myself.
Yeah, so true. And the two things that I thought of as you were describing that is, that's another thing that we tend to do when our loved ones are in pain. We tend to do stuff for them. Oh, no, you stay there. You put your feet up. I will take care of you. And it's a lovely thing. It's a lovely sentiment. But yes, but it's not always the best thing for us. Also getting that injured mentality. If I do that, I'm going to hurt myself. And so I won't do that. I won't even try that. And so that, again, that will make you more likely for the pain to stay. Now, it's really interesting with our exercise program that's designed for bone. We, of course, have thousands of people coming and doing this exercise program for their bones. And they say, I just didn't know whether I was going to be able to do this because I've always had such terrible back pain. And then 6 months later, you know what? I haven't had a sore back for a couple of months. And they come for their bones, but actually it takes care of that other thing that was happening. Not because it's magic, and it's not even in their head. It's the fact that the muscles have got stronger. They're able to support that joint that was hurting and keep everything aligned the way it's supposed to. And hey, presto, pain gone.
Incredible. Okay. I really want to get to your specialty, actually, the exercise component and the movement. And for so many years when we're told if you had osteopenia or osteoporosis, like don't lift heavy, don't do impact. And then came your Lift More trial. You've done so many other research studies, but we'll concentrate on that maybe. But that challenged this thought completely. And I'd love to know what made you question that status quo and then go against the grain to do this research.
Pure frustration, probably. For years, people have been doing exercise studies and for bone health. And firstly, they were not testing the people who needed the exercise. So we won't actually recruit people with osteoporosis because that's too dangerous. And it's like, why?
That's the people
How
who
are you
need it
going
the
to know
most.
if it helps? And second of all, we all, myself included, thought, I won't do anything in this intervention that is likely to put them at risk and risk of fracture. But when, after years of people doing that kind of research and finding either there was no benefit to the exercise in terms of growing bone, and in fact, it wasn't even preventing loss, and that would be like walking interventions and swimming. It doesn't even prevent loss. And ones that were a little bit more like a gym-focused program, they were mainly only able to prevent loss, not grow. Well, I started my research career as an animal researcher, and so I was sort of in the thick of this, and I knew that you could grow bone in animals, even older animals, if you applied the right kind of loading, but it had to be much higher strain, induce higher strains in bone than regular loading. Bone requires overload to adapt. And these other exercise programs had simply not been overloading the bone enough. So here, on the one hand, you got, okay, we need to load them. Okay, they might break. So we just decided somebody has to do it, and that somebody was us. We just decided to be very careful, to be have a lot of focus on proper technique, to increase the loading in safe graduations, and to supervise them the whole time. Mm-hmm. Twice a week, 30 minutes, high intensity resistance and impact training. So yes, there was impact in there. Yes, there was heavy lifting. And we did that for 8 months. And lo and behold, we grew bone.
It's incredible. Only twice a week. And for 8 months, you could see growth.
Yeah.
And quite significant.
Typically, you would do an exercise intervention or any kind of intervention for bone for 12 months because it takes a long time for it to adapt. But this was a PhD program, and this guy needed to graduate. So we just made it a little bit shorter because we were pretty sure we would be able to see something. 8 months is about the least you can really do it and still see an effect on DEXA. Yeah, and of course, we were not only interested to know whether they would grow bone, but we wanted to know if we were going to hurt them, and nobody fractured. There was one back strain, but it was a mild one. They went and had some physio and came back and were lifting again in 2 weeks' time, and the functional outcomes were amazing. These risk factors for falling were reduced, their posture improved, their mental health improved, which was more what they were telling us. I can't believe how strong I feel, and I'm doing stuff I haven't done for years. And yeah, so
that confidence, is important as well. Having the confidence, knowing that you can do it in a controlled situation, you get better at it. And then when you're at home or out in the world, you continue to do that, right? So it's not just twice a week. You kind of continue. I imagine these patients still continue to do what these, not exactly the exercises maybe, but there's movement and they're not afraid anymore to pick up something, right?
They're just more likely to go on that hike with their friends, whereas before they thought, oh no, if I turn my ankle, I'm going to break my ankle. Well, no, I'm strong enough now. I can do that. I can lift my own bag of flour off the supermarket shelf. And that just, everybody, of course, has a different level at which they feel like they've had a major breakthrough. And we had people in the study who had fractures previously. They did have established kyphosis, the rounded back, and they were fine.
And can they reverse the rounded back, or is that for the rest of their lives?
Yeah, so if there is a wedge fracture, so the vertebrae is actually crushed into that wedge shape, you can't regrow the bone. The only way to get that shape back is surgery. But what you can do is make the back muscles stronger. And in fact, the outcome that none of us were expecting was an increase in height in the intervention group because they were just standing up straighter. So yes, you can definitely improve that rounded posture, but you're not going to change the shape of the vertebrae. You're just going to stand up straighter.
And then when you stand up straighter, you have better posture. If you have better posture and more muscle mass, you have less risk of falling, or that's all of it just kind of spirals into a good situation. And so since the study was 8 months, so if they did 12 months or 2 years, you would see better results, I imagine, or is there a threshold?
So since we've rolled that exercise program out into the Onero program in the clinic, we're able to track that because the clinic's been open for over 10 years now. And so it's a research clinic. So we are collecting the same data on people, but these are anybody who wants to come, who can move independently and follow instructions, can do it. It's not like a clinical trial where we screen people out. Now, when you follow these people, we see the exact same benefit. And we also do see, particularly in the people who have the lowest bone mass to begin, that you do continue to increase bone mass year on year, and it continue to get stronger year on year, because the bones are going to increase to the point that they are best able to withstand the load you're putting on them. If you continue to increase the load, they're going to continue to improve. So yeah, it's definitely a long-term good news story.
What was the average age in the study?
64, yeah, with quite a bit of range. And I think the oldest person was early 80s. Youngest was 58. We had a cutoff of 60, but we did let one woman in at 58 because she was well and truly past menopause. And that was the main reason that we put the point at 60, because the effect of that withdrawal of estrogen is so powerful. We didn't want it to be confusing our outcomes. And that is an area for research that we're interested in, to have a look and see what menopause is doing. We do have some data on that.
Yeah, so you were screening. I read some explanation about this, the research, that you were really screening for certain things in certain people, and they had to have osteoporosis or osteopenia, correct? And then they couldn't be on hormone therapy because of that confounding factor. And so it does show you can reverse osteoporosis without hormone therapy. I get this question all the time. Can you do that without the hormones?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because the effect is a physical one. There are a lot of chemicals that do influence bone health and what bones do, but a physical stimulus that actually bends the bone a little bit, it doesn't matter what the bone is bathed in, it's going to respond to that. So you don't have to have estrogen for the bones to respond to that. Helps, but you don't have to.
I remember years ago, I interviewed an exercise physiologist, and he was saying that in order to build bone, you need to lift heavy. And he was explaining, like, if you're lifting a weight with your hand, the bone is actually bending, and that would help with the bone. But if you were to do, and this was during COVID time, and he's like, yeah, but some people are now doing just lighter weights, and they're doing a lot of repetitions, which will grow the muscle, but it won't have that impact on the bone. Is that true?
We don't actually know the answer to that question yet. And my sense is, from the studies that have been done with lighter weights and more reps, no, it doesn't tend to grow bone. It does benefit muscle. But I feel like there may be a situation where, if perhaps you are exercising muscle a little bit heavier than light weights to fatigue, possibly that might be a good stimulus. But really, heavy is the answer, because we're trying to bend the bone. And when I'm talking about bending, I'm not talking about a green stick. I'm talking about, it's a tiny little bend that you wouldn't be able to see with your eyes, but the bone cells can detect it because they're tiny as well.
Yeah, it's this bone signaling that's happening. So I would imagine that even if you did light weights and you did many repetitions and you are growing muscle, the muscle's pulling on the bone, and that is a signal, no, to build bone, even maybe not as big, but slightly.
Yeah, so there's sort of an ongoing there's two schools of thought. What's more important, gravitational and joint reaction forces, or muscle? I tend to believe it's gravitational and joint reaction forces are what is most important, because we know when people go into microgravity and you take that away, even if these astronauts do work out up there because they're trying to hold on their bones, they're still losing bone. That weight-bearing loading is really critical. But having stronger muscles pulling on your bones is absolutely better than weak muscles. So it's a combination, because we can't have gravity without muscle, because muscle is what allows us to resist gravity. So the whole thing is interconnected. And I think the important thing to remember is, if you're exercising for bone, you want to be on your own 2 feet. You don't want to be sitting or lying down or floating. You want to be on your feet.
Yeah, exactly. What do astronauts do then to preserve the bone? Are they
Yeah, they've over the years they've tried all kinds of things. They're doing a similar sort of protocol to our protocol, but of course you can't take huge weights into space. So they have a machine that does everything. They tether loads to parts of the like the space station or whatever, and so they pull on it in more of a using more of a pulley system and those sorts of things. So they can still load like crazy, but it's tethered. They have to have something to actually pull against.
Oh, interesting. That's a whole other conversation. But I'm wondering, the participants that you had in the study, were they also guided with nutritional advice or supplementation?
All we did was we tracked what they ate. So in Australia, we have the AusCal questionnaire, which is one that's really targeted to primarily calcium. We tracked that and accounted for it. In the old days, we used to encourage people or give people a calcium supplement to take while you were doing an intervention. But given the controversy about calcium supplements, it's not really ethical to always give people a calcium supplement if they've got a cardiovascular disease sort of genetic predisposition. Giving people a bunch of calcium supplements not always that great. So we just encourage them to eat a balanced diet. We find out what they're eating and we account for the differences between them in our statistical analysis. At the clinic, at the bone clinic now, we have a dietitian who absolutely is part of their very first consult. So she finds out what they're eating and then tries to make sure that we get everybody who's sort of over 50 up in the 1,200, 1,300 milligrams of calcium a day. And then, of course, we talk about things like protein.
Yes, then we know. So you didn't guide them and say, eat more of this or take this supplement, but you were logging what they were eating. So was there any results or outcomes that you saw that people who ate more protein had better results or not?
No, not in Lift More. I don't think our numbers were high enough for us to be able to detect that. Plus, doesn't matter how good your dietary assessment tool is, they are still, it's an estimate at best,
Yeah.
because people are very bad at remembering what they eat, and foods are very bad at having in them what the manufacturers say. Yeah, very much it's a bit of a shotgun kind of thing. But now I've got all this beautiful data from the clinic when I've got people who are reporting to the dietitian and they are looking very closely at diet and trying to get an even better handle on what's being eaten. It is clear that the people who are eating the recommended daily allowance are responding more to the exercise program than the people who are not. And it's a very clear discrimination between low and high calcium eaters, how much they respond. And to me, I mean, that's just fascinating. It's intuitive, and it's the reason why we tell people it's fantastic to do your lifting, but you must give your body the building blocks.
Yeah, exactly. I think we have this whole other conversation about nutrition and stuff, but I want to focus now on the exercises and the exercises that you performed in this study. And then what are the exercises also that you're performing or recommending in the clinic? So a woman who's listening now, who's going through this menopause transition, worried about her bones, has maybe osteopenia or osteoporosis. Where can she get started? What types of exercises should she do? And I do want to cover, and I don't know if it's the lift more, but the ground force reaction of 4 times your body weight versus maybe 1 time when walking. And if you could clear up, what does a woman really need for stronger bones?
The problem is with this conversation is I start to sound like I have a massive conflict of interest, which of course I do, because the minute that I opened the clinic, which is a research clinic, people come to us for our exercise program, and of course they pay for that. That's how I pay my staff. But now it has been commercialized, and so the exercise program is called Onero. So the reason we did this is because it's just not safe for people to do unsupervised. So we've been open for nearly 11 years. We license the program so that it can be delivered by physiotherapists and exercise physiologists all over the world. And if people go to a map and type in Onero locations, the map will come up and they'll see all these dots everywhere. If there's a dot near you, go to that person. They'll do an assessment of you and they'll deliver Onero to you with supervision and with consideration of your specific comorbidities, those other things that are wrong with you that might make you need special attention in various things. So I don't tend to talk about the specific exercises because people tend to go, I'm just going to go and do that in the gym. And that's the worst thing you can do if you've got severe osteoporosis, because you will hurt yourself. And we hear about that happening. So if you can't find an Onero provider, then the next best thing for you to do is go to the gym and find an exercise practitioner, not just somebody who's an unqualified personal trainer, somebody who has qualifications, and get them to create a program for you. Make sure you tell them that you have low bone mass, get them to create a specific gym program, because something in the gym is going to be better than nothing. Do that a couple of times a week, and then the rest of the week, just do what you want to do, because absolutely best exercise for any person is the one that they want to do. Otherwise, they're just not going to do it. You can have the best recommendation that anyone can give you. But if you like swimming, swim. Doesn't matter that it doesn't help bone. It's really good for everything else, and you'll do it. Just those 2 days a week, get to the gym and do something.
Do something. But if somebody says, I love to walk, I walk every day, I've got osteopenia, is that going to help them with their bones?
Once upon a time, I would have said blanket no, because walking doesn't load your bones enough. Your bones see that all the time because you're walking around your house and to your car and at the shops, and your bones go, I know this. You're fully adapted for that. I don't need to do anything. So it's not going to grow bone. But on the other hand, a lifetime of walking is better than not walking. Mm-hmm. So I think over time, over 60 years, it's better than not walking. It will help. Plus, if you love doing it, do it, because it's good for everything else. But where the problem arises is that about 6 or 7 years ago, Kathy Sherrington published a review that showed that for some people, walking actually increases falls. So if you're
increases falls. Oh,
yeah,
because you're not sitting down.
It's partly that, but it's partly if you're, let's say, an 80-year-old who has not done any exercise at all, you go to the doctor, you've been told you've got osteoporosis, and what should I do? Oh, just start walking. This is somebody who is not safe to walk by themselves. They're not particularly, their lower extremity is probably not strong at all. So if they do go to fall, they're not going to be able to stop themselves. If there's a sudden perturbation, one of the millions of electric scooters that zooms along a path, they're going to get a fright and probably fall over. The neighbour's dog runs out and starts barking at the fence, they'll get a fright. That's the sort of person, if you tell them to walk and they start walking by themselves, they're probably going to have a fall. So they can walk with somebody else who they can link arms with, but that person is much, much better off going to the gym and doing some muscle strengthening activity.
You're right. Exactly. And maybe also work on the balance in a yoga class, because I generally tend to recommend in terms of bone health, and correct me if I'm wrong, is we need the strength and we need the impact and we need some balance. And I like to talk about mobility and flexibility and agility and all that stuff. But I think those are the kind of three important things that I've been learning. And with the impact itself, I'd love for you to explain what ground reaction force is, mm-hmm. and what either whether it's your study or maybe other studies show that we need in terms of, is it true? Is it 4 times? Or is that just for the hip? Or is that just for certain people?
Oh, it's kind of a number that probably varies between people. But yet it does have to be quite an intense sort of an impact to jolt the bone. I talk about your cheeks jiggling. It's that kind of impact that creates a cheek jiggle. However, again, you have to be careful with it, because think about some people who have had a fracture may have had that fracture by perhaps they were walking downstairs and they weren't paying attention and they didn't realize there was another step, and they thought they were about to step onto flat ground, but they didn't, and they jolted down onto the very bottom. That's enough to cause a fracture. Now, that's the kind of impact that's good for bone, but not unprepared and not without a real graduated introduction to that. So when we deliver impact in the Onero program, you're introduced depending on your capacity at different levels, so that we, number one, don't cause a fracture, and number two, don't cause other injuries like to your knees and your hips. So we don't want to cause pain. So there's a way to do it, and there's a real difference between people. It's not the sort of thing that I would say to grandma, just jump down your stairs. Sure, but you might end up breaking your hip. So,
yeah.
I mean, it's all part of the program. We also, the Lift More study was twice per week for 30 minutes. Onero is actually 45 minutes, because just as you said, it is really important to add in balance and mobility. And so we've slotted that in for another 15 minutes of the program, is that we teach people those exercises because those ones they can do on their own and they need to do them a lot. So also in Kathy's paper, or may have been a later paper, showing that it actually takes 2.5 hours a week or something for 6 months for balance training to actually have an effect on falls. So it takes a lot. It's not just, I might just stand on one foot while I'm doing the washing up. That's not going to cut it. It's got to be high challenge balance activities, and you've got to concentrate on doing them frequently enough and mastering them.
What did you say, 2 hours per week?
Yeah, for about 6 months before you're going to see a difference. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. How are we going to split that up throughout the week?
Well, and I should say too that I believe falls research is very heterogeneous. Nobody does the same exercises, and so it's really hard to come up with the falls prevention program. So what they tend to do is they put everything together that people have tested and saying, well, at this level, doing this amount, there was an outcome, and actually including, for example, the 245 minutes of Onero, that's counted. So you would only have to do an extra half an hour of your balance exercises or some other balance challenging activity, like maybe playing tennis.
Yeah.
Tennis is a great activity, running backwards and forwards across the court. So that may be enough of your 2 hours of exercise a week to address it, because remember, half of the battle is muscle strength. So if Onero is growing muscle in your legs, much less likely to fall over.
So you mentioned Onero several times, and I went to the website myself, and I saw that map, and I was like, oh, wow, these are people who are trained in the techniques to help you build bone safely. And I think there's been a lot of emphasis in this discussion about don't just go and YouTube exercises or even follow me. Like I sometimes show reels with, okay, these are the exercises that showed in this study, but don't just go and do that. I always have these disclaimers, like if you have osteoporosis, osteopenia, like be careful with this. Yeah. Go see a professional. And so this is where, because I think that's, you've disrupted the old thinking of, oh, be careful, don't move, don't do impact, don't do exercise because you're going to fracture the bone because you already are fragile. But yet we don't want the pendulum to swing completely the other side. Everybody just jumping off the buildings and breaking everything. And so there's a way to do this. So explain a little bit, how long has Onero been around and how does it work? Somebody walks into Onero and says, look, I want to build better bones, whether they have no osteoporosis or osteopenia or whether they do.
So, well, where the clinic is in Brisbane, there is only one bone clinic, but there's lots and lots of Onero providers who are in other physio clinics and so on. People just contact us, and because they've probably been referred by their doctor or they've had a bone density test and just gone, yikes, and I didn't realize. And then they come and have an assessment with us and they learn a lot. We teach them a lot. And then we say, now we think you need to do Onero, and you don't have to, but it's here if you want to do it. And then you do as much or as little as you want or can afford, or we keep our prices very low because I'm interested in research. So everybody who comes is a research participant, and we follow them up every year. They come back and they have all their tests again. And so that's how I'm able to see whether it's working and whether things like calcium are having an effect. And so it's purely, they just contact us and we do an assessment and away they go.
I love that. It's research, but you also have clinical experience. And this is what's so key, because we can say, oh, the research says this, but in actual reality, does it work, or is it very practical, and what are the problems? I think somebody walks in the clinic, then if they wanted to go on the clinic, you have the bone clinic, which is in Brisbane. So that's, if you're in Australia, I guess they can see the bone clinic, but if they're anywhere else in the world, and I've seen you've got people who are trained in Europe and the US and all over the world, which is amazing. And these people have gone through the training that needs to be done. It's very different than going to a physio who's just got a certification and, okay, let me figure this out with you. We don't really want to do that. So they can walk in to find these trainers, and then they can agree to, if they need it 5 times a week, twice a week, or whatever. How does that work?
Yeah, we say you must have a day's rest in between an Onero session because your muscles need to recover. So that means that the maximum you could do a week would be 3 days. And we do have some people coming 3 days a week and they're going great guns. But because particularly there are plenty of people who are still working and they're busy and they're sandwich generation. They've got kids, they've got parents, they're doing everything. So they can only afford to come once a week purely because of time. So we've got plenty of people who just come once a week. Mm-hmm. And once, twice, and 3 times a week. It's better to do something than nothing. The people who don't live near us, there are actually plenty of people who fly in, even from internationally, fly in to have an assessment because they just want to really get the full treatment and information. But then they go and do Onero at one of their closest licensees. If there's not a licensee close to you, and I've already said you can go to a gym, that's definitely better than doing nothing, but you can also go to your local, we call them physios in America, PTs, physical therapists, and tell them about Onero. I don't advertise the Onero program. All those dots you see all over the world, they are people who have contacted us and said, we want to be an Onero licensee because one of their clients has said, I want to do this. And so they pick up a license and all of a sudden they've got 30 classes a week because the demand is huge.
Do any of these qualified trainers work online if somebody's really in the boonies? And
no, it is one of the most common questions, and I really wish that we could do that. We'll do telehealth appointments for people if they're absolutely stuck. We'll give them an exercise program that they can go to the gym with, but it won't be Onero because we don't want to break them. So we give them as much of what we know is going to be the best for them. That's not Onero, but is as close as we can get it and still be safe.
Okay. I'll have a link to that in the show notes, and I'm going to have to find one myself. I'm excited to just test that program out. And I'm going to have to let you go because I've already gone way over time, but I have one last question that popped up because there's been some talk about GLP-1s. These are the weight loss peptides and the impact that it has on bones. And there's a little bit of controversy in terms of if it's good for bones or not good for bones. Can you explain what the research has been showing?
Yeah. Those drugs that are so effective at weight loss are fairly indiscriminate for what you're losing. So you are losing fat, but you are also losing muscle and bone. So everybody was horrified when they realized this was happening. But of course, if you have bariatric surgery, the same thing happens. Dramatic weight loss is never just fat. It's always going to be muscle and bone as well. So this is the reason why if you're going down that path, you do need to do something like Onero to try and prevent that bone loss and hang on to your muscle. Because, of course, fat you can regain easily. Muscle and bone, not so much. So you want to hang on to it while you're losing weight. And, of course, these drugs have been a game changer for many people. I'm certainly not suggesting that people shouldn't use them. They've been so incredible for diabetes and so on. But it was an unexpected outcome. And now people who are regaining fat after being on the drugs are stuck with this osteopenia and even sarcopenia.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's why everybody really emphasizes exercising and eating your protein. And I know it's hard when you don't have an appetite. But if I've seen people do it right and I've seen people do them wrong. And I guess the right way would be continuing with the exercise and the protein and all that. But it would make sense in this, if you are losing weight, is it bone? Is it muscle? Is it other tissues? Like it just kind of makes sense. So I think the surprising thing is that I would think that if somebody were to gain the weight back and there's more weight bearing on those bones, that perhaps they would get their bone mass back. Maybe not the muscle, but that's not the case.
Yeah. Well, over time, I often say bones are the only thing that fat is good for. That's obviously a gross generalization. But people who do have a lot of adipose tissue are, of course, loading their bones. And so they are actually bigger than they otherwise would be. And that is one of the reasons why you lose bone, because you're taking away that mechanical loading. But it's not always good, healthy bone. And certainly the extra muscle that people have to carry around a large body mass is also not necessarily good, healthy muscle. It's often infiltrated with fat and so on. So exercise is the thing that's going to give you good, healthy muscle. And that really, muscle is king for all reasons. Muscle is king. It's great for metabolism. It's great for function. It helps load bone. It's very important.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. So in your clinic then, and all the research you've done, there are people, I assume, or maybe not, who've had osteoporosis, who are in the red. So if you get a DEXA scan, you have the green, you have the yellow, which is osteopenia, and you have the red. So imagine the people who are in the red. Are you able to move them up to the green?
We have done. Yeah. You've got to be dedicated. You've got to be in there and coming consistently and increasing your weight and really doing it properly. But yes, we can. You won't jump from red to green. That doesn't happen. That's huge, particularly depending on your age. But yes, over the years, you just chip away at it. A perfect example was a woman who came in to be interviewed by one of our local TV channels the other week. And she was telling me how over 4 years, she's gained over 20% bone mass. And she has definitely each year she's gained extra bone, and it's because she's working hard. She's lifting heavy.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Okay. That's wonderful because some people don't realize that you can reverse osteoporosis, and that brings hope. So it's nice to see that you are showing that it's all possible, doing the right exercises and having the right nutrition, all the other things that are really important for bones. Before we let you go, is there anything else that you'd like to share that we haven't covered yet that a woman going through this menopause transition needs to know about her bones?
I think we've probably covered most of it.
What would you like to leave her? Is there anything that some tip or advice?
Probably the last comment that you made is the most important one. It's never too late, and you can reverse bone loss. You absolutely can. You just have to get in there and lift.
I love it. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Belinda. I will have links in the show notes to find you if they have questions. I got your email, your Facebook. The Bone Clinic website is theboneclinic.com.au. Are there any other places you'd like to direct the audience to find you?
Probably if people are thinking about an Onero license so they can deliver the program to their clients, then the Onero Academy, I think it's onero.academy.com, something like that. Just put
I'll
in
find
Onero
it.
Academy, it'll come up, yeah.
Actually, it's onero.academy. I do have it in the show notes.
It probably is that, yeah. We're doing a bit of work at the moment to improve it. It's not a great website, but we'll have information on there, and it's also got an email address that if there's a PT listening and they want to become an Onero provider, they just send an email and we can take care of them. It's a really straightforward process. The training's all online, heaps and heaps of resources to help them, equipment lists, all sorts of stuff. Yeah. It's easy to do.
And a good support team. People who've done the research. So wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for staying up late as well. You're all the way in Australia, and I appreciate your time. I hope to have you on again. We can talk about osteoarthritis and all the joints, and it's like a whole other can of worms, but wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure. Lovely to chat.
And thank you for everyone else who got to the end of the episode. I always don't want to forget to thank you. You're obviously interested in bone health, and we will see you next time. Take care.